At first I was planning to mount the fan to the window through a louvered grille, but I decided to go with something a little less conspicuous and install a small openable window. I needed to rip some 2x4 to make the window frame. I don't have a table saw and I don't have the space for one, so I decided to try something I've been wanting to do for a while. Panel pins were used to secure the 2x4 to the bench. Then a circular saw was used to rip them. The saw left a rough edge that needed to be planed and sanded smooth. It's obviously not as convenient or accurate as a real table saw, but for the occasional woodworking I do, it seems to work well enough. Miters were cut and hinges were fitted. Again lacking the proper tools, I clamped a belt sander to the bench with a board raised on the table, and a relatively straight stick tacked square to the sander. The belt was pretty old though and wasn't cutting much. Time to christen a new belt. With a sander mount like this, the motor vents are covered up. It got hot pretty fast and it smelled a bit like it was starting to burn out, so I let it cool down frequently. The miters weren't that accurate. I found an offcut that was closest to 45 degrees and tacked that to the MDF. I bought a band clamp along with the new sanding belts, which made clamping the frame up a lot easier. I then reinforced the joint with dowels just to make sure it won't come apart. I decided to paint the frame at this point. I'm using an old tin of DIY store brand primer and top coat. I'm not expecting much, but I may as well give it a try before spending 30 quid on a tin of primer and another tin of top coat. With the frame drying, I looked at how to join the pillar to the door. I came up with a solution using a sort of goofy tongue and groove joint with the tongue held to the door with dowels. I'd mucked up and forgot to rattle edge for the glass into the frame pieces. My first cut was a bit too aggressive and I really made a mess of the wood. Then I made a second pass a bit deeper and that was worse than the first. I started to get a bit worried that I might have really messed up at this point. With the next edge I was much more cautious with the routing, taking off less than the cutter width. It still wasn't smooth sailing though, and it took a lot of sideways pressure to prevent the router digging in. There were still a few gouges, but after puttied and painted they probably wouldn't be noticeable. I figured now would be a good time to practice my glass cutting technique on the glass from an old picture frame. I was shy about putting pressure on the cutter for the first score and it didn't cut at the beginning. I also banged the underside of the score way too hard. With a good score and gentle taps I had much more success. There was something very pleasing about how it just dropped off. I then tried cutting a frame to fit the window. I'd made it slightly too big and just made a mess trying to shave the extra off. Of course, with a real piece of glass I would have just routed the frame larger if this happened. Time to work on the window proper. The old window was secured on the inside with a strip of moulding. There's a fair bit of rot. Camera batteries died before I could record myself sanding the ledge off around where the new window was going to go. Here I'm just squaring off the corners the sander didn't reach. The tongues were then fitted. Now that I know how long it has to be, it's time to cut the wavy glass. It didn't score the full way across, so I went back over the line in the middle. which is a thing I was told you should never do, but I didn't feel I could clean with an incomplete score. And it worked. The glass for the smaller window was also cut out. The score here goes right over the thickest part of the glass, so it was a bit of a struggle getting it to break. The glass was a bit short to begin with, and I needed to shim the bottom of the larger frame to accommodate it. It was hard getting a good camera angle into this corner. So for putting you in the smaller window, I transferred it to the bench. First, the window was held in with panel pins. I didn't feel comfortable hammering so close to the glass, so I stuck some scrap wood under to hopefully cushion any mist blows. This old putty was pretty dry and crumbly, but it's all I had at the time. First it's needed to soften it a bit, then it's pushed into the corners. I'm using a wallpaper scraper as a putty knife. Stuff I'd read said to hold it flat against the frame as you pull it along, but I found it tended to lift the putty off a bit, so I figured it was better to angle it slightly so it would push the putty into the frame as I went over. Of course, with that said, it still took a few attempts to get it to actually stick. The thing was fixed onto the back for the window to butt up against. It should keep the rain out. Before gluing it on, a channel was cut into it for a bolt to pass through. This should keep people out. For mounting the fan to the window, I went with keyhole hangers. I wear gauntlets when using a needle file since poking yourself with one ain't no fun. You end up with metal shavings in the hole and you really have to dig each one out, or it starts to fester pretty fast. With the fan mounted, I really wanted to stress test it to make sure it was actually drawing fumes out. In the lab I melted wax, sugar and potassium nitrate together. I then poured it all into copper tubes. The results were a bit embarrassing. The sugar and nitrate sank to the bottom. I don't think the wax was really necessary, or maybe I should have heated the mix up until the sugar melted as well. I don't really like the idea of heating nitrate and fuel together too much. I remelted the mix and poured the supernatant wax off, then stuck the remaining lumps onto a bit of angle iron. I'm a little disappointed that the lilac flames for the potassium didn't show up too well on camera. Well, it didn't show up at all, but this close to the fan was extracting most of the smoke. I then tried a bit further back. It's easier to see sped up, but the fumes do seem to be making their way towards the door. With the back door open, I'm getting a bit of a through draft through it should stop deadly vapours from building up when I run the forge. So with the ventilation problem sorted, it's now time to actually start attempting to make armour. I'm still lacking a lot of the perhaps necessary tools, but I figure I'll deal with each of those as they're needed.